Hello everyone, my name is Joanne Lockwood and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had the conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SEE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 59, with the title Dare to Be You. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Shelley Bridgman. Shelley describes herself as a performance coach, psychotherapist, and workshop facilitator. When I asked Shelley to describe her superpower, she said that she is very good at being with people who are struggling or in deep pain and helping them chart a way forward. Hello, Shelley. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Joanne. Really good to be here with you today.
So, Shelley, dare to be you. What does that mean?
Well, apart from the fact it's the title of a podcast that I'm launching, I think that whenever I've done any work as a therapist or coach, it always seems to me that what we're really doing is uncovering ourselves and who we really are, being our authentic selves. It's one of those glib expressions that people use, be authentic. And it's very hard sometimes for people to sort of peel off the layers of protection and actually be themselves. Sometimes it takes, depending on your circumstance, takes quite a lot of courage. I would say probably for most people it does. But until we do that, we're never really being fully ourselves and really using the gifts that we've got. So that was the thinking behind it. And when you mentioned my superpower, I was waiting to have to put the T-shirt on with an S on it or something. But I think for me, where I started out, I suppose, was I was a Samaritan volunteer back in the day, long time ago now. And it was my sort of first introduction to working with people who were in a bad place. And I learned at doing that how to just be with somebody who was really struggling. And I think I then evolved to a place where I wanted to be a bit more proactive and to do things to help people move forward. But in essence, the job stays the same. When you first meet somebody, if they're in a bad, you have a very different conversation with somebody if they're standing on a bridge, ready to jump off, than if you do when you're across a desk and they're telling you that they're feeling depressed or suicidal. If you think about it, you wouldn't speak to them in the same way. So I suppose it was just over a period of time and training and everything else, just learning how to really do that. And I think I've evolved now into a place where I'm able to be with somebody who's in that low spot without panicking and without trying to fix them quickly. And the first thing people need to do is to know they're being listened to and there's somebody who actually cares a fig about what happens to them. That's the start, really. So that would be my short answer into that.
There's an expression I heard some time ago that everything you've ever desired is on the other side of fear. And that really resonated with me because I realized that fear is what holds us back. Fear of humiliation, fear of rejection, fear of just being seen sometimes. And when you actually take that step, you think you're going to step off a cliff, but really it's just an inch, and you just carry on walking. And the reality of fear is it's often in your own mind, isn't it?
Well, it's an interesting one because I don't disagree with anything you've said, other than saying that I don't like the expression that that people use the acronym false evidence appearing real.
Yeah.
But there's something disempowering about that because it sort of implies, well, you're stupid to feel it. You shouldn't be feeling it. And fear is real. How we respond to it, of course, is a choice. And if you're an existentialist, you'll believe that ultimately all fear is the fear of death. But I always think fear comes down to two basic fears, really: fear of failure and fear of rejection. And depending on your upbringing and your experiences, you'll have a sort of leaning towards one or other of those. So although we can argue that it's not rational, and largely it's not, like you just said, fear of standing up saying something, well, no one's likely to shoot you. But at the same time, it feels a bit like it, or it can do. And for members of society who are constantly feeling battered and attacked, of course, they get resilient and a bit reserved. So they're very wary about opening up. But I think the job of mine, actually, whether I'm a psychotherapist or a coach, is to help people have a strategy to overcome that fear. So to say, look, I get it. I get why you're feeling it, but actually, these are the things that you could maybe do. How do you feel about that? Could try A, we can try B. And because I think, people always say we're always fearful of not being enough. And I think that's an oversimplification, because there are some people, especially people who come from minorities, where their big fear is not so much that they're enough, but that they're almost too much. There's no space for me in the world. I'm too difficult for people, which is a very different fear. And, people from minority groups, be it, your whole thing is about diversity and inclusion. So many of the people you will speak to or attract will feel in a minority, whether it's disability, sexuality, gender, whatever it is. So I think it's not always about feeling enough. It is that sometimes it's about, that trope of if you really know me, you might not like me. You're saying that you like me, but if you really get to know me, will you? Because my experience is when people do, they don't. That might be playing out in their subconscious. So, yeah. So
Yeah,
fear
I
is the
think
biggie. Fear is the biggie, but
yeah,
yeah.
I think I lived a life for much of my life that involved alcohol because
Mm,
and I would never say alcohol was a coping mechanism. It became a habit. I became a person with it,
yeah,
and without it, I maybe didn't like myself enough, or I found
yeah,
myself not enjoying what I was doing, where alcohol made it
yeah.
more enjoyable. Something.
Well, it removes
It
your
took a long time to
inhibitions, doesn't
realise that if I took alcohol away, I could then make better choices about whether I really wanted to do something or not.
it? Yeah, yeah. I always remember the legendary rock drummer Ginger Baker, who died a year or two ago, didn't he, sadly, from Cream. And I remember him saying, because he tried just about every substance known to mankind, I think, and he said, I suddenly realised one day that I could still play the drums if I wasn't high. I didn't even need a drink. So he kind of worked himself into an assumption that without substances, and let's face it, work's a substance. People work all the time as a deflection. It numbs the pain. I was good at drinking, and it just numbed my mind. So if I'd had a lot to drink, then I wasn't with myself. I could just get through. But of course, you learn that
Mm,
there's quite a high cost to pay when you do that, because you're not actually being yourself. And of course, ultimately, it's going to damage your body. But I don't want to get all preachy about that. We all do things to our bodies that we shouldn't. But yeah, so we all find a way of numbing the
yeah,
pain. And what you've highlighted is that we've all got a fear of something, whether it's acceptance, rejection, whatever it might be. And we find very creative ways to avoid the pain without really facing it. And I think my job when I'm working with people is to say, look, you can face this. I'll do it with you for a while, and you won't be consumed by it. You will come through it. You just need to take that first step. Yeah.
yeah. You're so right. It is that
Mm.
first step is often the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the first challenge is identifying there is a step to take, and then once you've identified the step, is having the courage or the support to take it. And I
Yeah.
mean, I remember my own gender transition 5-6 years ago. That massive first conversation
Yeah.
was enormous. It was the biggest thing in my life. It was What do
No,
I? Because you
because you
can't
didn't
take it
know.
back. Sometimes these things are binary. Once you've said something, you can't unsay it, can you?
No, and you didn't know for sure what the reaction would be. So it was stepping off the cliff in a way, because
Mm.
you kind of probably thought, well, the people you first told, you probably wouldn't have told them had you thought they were going to be very negative, but you didn't actually know until you did it. So it's that first step forward. And I mean, we could go into all sorts of cliches here, couldn't we? Like a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step and all that stuff. We all know that, but to actually do it is not quite the same as reading it in a book. And
No.
but my experience is that when you, funny enough, I was talking about this at the weekend at a conference. My experience is that when you step out, good people join you. When you're trying to do something, amazing people will show up, but they won't show up until you take that step.
Mm.
And that's the scary bit. And that's
And
really,
another cliche is, you know who your true friends are in your moment of need,
yeah,
and you step out into the light. You take your covers off, if you like, and the people that run away probably weren't your friends. They weren't the people you
no.
were looking for. Everybody
And I,
else.
and I would hazard a guess, because I don't know you well enough, but I would hazard a guess that some of the ones you thought would be difficult weren't, and vice versa. One or two of the ones you
Yeah,
thought would be okay perhaps weren't, you know? Because you never quite know
yeah,
what's going on with people, do you? Until you actually, confront them with something like that. You take a guess.
yeah. Completely. There was a friend I had from school. I think we probably met at the age of 10 or something like that. And I thought we were kind of good enough friends, and he effectively walked away. Just
Yeah,
um, said through other people that he doesn't want to get involved with me, doesn't want to know me, doesn't want to talk about it. Just
yeah,
goodbye. And it's like, oh, not even talk to me, not even go,
yeah, yeah.
I don't get it, but you're still you. It was just no,
Yeah,
didn't
I
want to engage at all.
remember
And I found that really
somebody
strange.
who wasn't my closest friend, but said through his wife, I'd rather think of him as being dead.
Mm.
And so I came back with something unrepeatable. Um, and then it said, I'm very much alive. But then there were other people who I thought, oh God, I'm going to be doing who weren't. My
Mm.
my my experience is people who are secure in themselves don't have a problem with most things. It's the people who are insecure have the problem, because they don't want anyone to think, oh, why are you a bit different? So they give a lot away. They say more about themselves than they would have done about you.
Mm.
The ones that walked away like that tell you far more, don't they, about their insecurity.
Yeah, and I often say to people, "Thank you for telling me. I don't have to guess what you're thinking. You're telling me, and it's
Yeah.
fine. I don't need to worry about you. It's quite
Right.
empowering knowing what people think."
It's quite interesting because I'd made an assumption. My oldest friend, probably, we were at school together from the age of 9 or 10, and lives in America now, and we'd lost touch. And I knew they would have heard that I had changed gender at some point. And I tried to contact them once and I didn't get a response. So I thought, oh, well, obviously they got a bit of a problem. I let it go. And literally 35 years on, I suddenly got an email. And to cut a long story short, what had happened, they hadn't seen my communication and they'd been afraid to contact me because they didn't know what to say. So I'd caused us to be like two bookends. So it was actually
Right.
my fault, really, because if I'd been braver and persisted, I would have found out that actually they wanted to stay in touch.
Yeah.
And I'll be going and having a holiday subject to world restrictions in America in the next few months to stay with them. But yeah, so I could have lost a good friend if
Mm.
had he not sort of overcome his kind of nervousness. He was just afraid to say the wrong thing in case he upset me, and there was me thinking the reverse. Just goes to show.
It's interesting when you say that. You've just reminded me about how I prejudged my father. I've not had a good relationship with my father for many years. It's kind of been a bit arm's length.
Right.
Christmas and birthdays, polite conversation. So he's also quite in his senior years. I think he's 89 this year, and he's quite deaf, hardly hears. So I ended up writing him a letter, just telling him about me and what I was doing, and he wrote me back a letter saying, "Don't be hasty, we can fix this," which I took as a kind of an old school rejection type thing. And then I slept, rather than reply to that, I slept on it for a year and a half.
Right.
I didn't speak to him. And I wrote to him again and said, look, it would sadden me if we never spoke again. I don't want us to never speak again. It would be a sad thing in my life if this stayed between us. And
Yeah.
I just want to meet you and talk to you and say hi.
Yeah.
So he came round, and he wasn't particularly good with my pronouns and particularly good with my name. But I thought, well, to be fair, in the scale of things, that doesn't matter. Actually, I want to have a last period of life relationship with my father, and he came around 2 weeks ago, and he used my name correctly every time. Avoided pronouns mostly. I think he probably used my name when he needed to. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And I think I misjudged him. I think I assumed that he wouldn't love me. I assumed he would reject me. And I'm completely surprised. And a lot of that was in my head because
Yeah.
I thought I knew him and I didn't.
But you see, what you've highlighted is the fact that, we all have an element of fear and reticence to overcome. And the problem with, I have this all the time when I'm with clients, is I always say, look, you can love your parents, you can hate them, but the one thing you cannot do is be indifferent, because you're conning
Mm.
yourself. They matter. You might not like them, and you have every right not to if they've been nasty. But just to pretend to yourself there are no consequence whatsoever, personally, I think is a bit of a delusion, because there is a connection,
Yeah.
and it might be difficult, but you can't really ignore it. Or if you do it at your peril. But there we go.
It actually
And
inspired me to think about him differently and actually
yeah,
think more warmly about. I mean, we had a difficult relationship in my teens. I was not easy. I had a lot of things going on in my head.
yeah,
I was probably maybe I was disappointing for him at that time. But I remember him in a different light. But having met him again recently,
mm,
and he whatever preconceived, whatever historical views he's had of trans people, he's still my dad, and he still acts like my dad, and he still supports me, still
and
interested in me.
he'll always be your dad. And you could
Yeah,
have slammed the door and closed it forever, couldn't you? But you didn't.
yeah, I could have, and that would.
Yeah,
I now realise
would have been a
that would
tragedy.
have been me doing
Yeah,
that, not him.
and would have been very sad. And it's quite interesting, because I had a difficult relationship with my father, but when he was almost 98 when he died, my dad. So he lived a good long life. And he was telling me, because he had dementia near the end, but as I jokingly put, and I wouldn't want to diminish the impact of dementia, but he literally forgot he didn't like me. And we had some really interesting conversations. And he was telling me about, and he was born in 1906. So he was a little boy when the First World War was going on. And like all families in North London, and like all families most families of that generation, they were quite big. And he told me the story when he was about 12 years old, of a telegram boy arriving, going into the house, and his mum came out saying, "Go and find your dad and tell him that Billy's been killed in France." So this was my dad's brother. He died in the trenches. And my father he didn't have any shoes. They literally were very poverty stricken. And he ran the length of the Holloway Road in North London. So if any Londoners know that part, it's a long road, to find his dad on the Essex Road, who was laying cobbles. And the reply was, tell your mum I try and get off early. And he wasn't being callous. He knew if he packed up and went home, he didn't get any money. Couldn't feed the kids. There was no welfare state. And when I heard that, my heart softened a bit, because I sort of thought, yeah, I cannot know what a tough time it was for him as a child. So he grew up with a very hard skin. So having somebody like me as a child wasn't easy for him. I'm not condoning what he did, because he was quite difficult, but I just saw a different side to him when I heard that story. And
Hmm.
there's always two sides to every attitude. And there's a difference between condoning bad behaviour and trying to seek out what makes someone tick, what makes them the way they are. You know, it's no
Yeah,
excuse for murdering somebody, but
no,
for all we
no.
know, that person had a wretched life and was severely hurt by the person they've killed. You know, who are we to judge? never, never condone a murder, but you never know what's going on behind the eyes. We've gone into a deep place, Joanne, with that.
We have gone into a deep place. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of your bio that you wrote earlier. One thing to say here is you passionately believe that every human being has genius within them
Yeah,
and should be
I
free
do.
to express their gifts for who they are. And that's a kind
Yeah,
of a core, a fundamental human right, really, isn't it? So why is
absolutely.
it so difficult sometimes for people to be accepted sometimes in society?
Well, and I think we collude with it. Some of us who, are in a minority, we buy into the trope that it's a tough fight, and we kind of shrink back a bit. And it's like, it's understandable. But I genuinely believe that, and I've worked with young people who had severe problems in one way or another, physical, mental, both. And they're always good at something. I mean, I was Oscar Wilde's one of my favourite writers. The world's full of endless Oscar quotes, but his very famous one, of course, was "You have to be yourself because everyone else is taken" or something. But
Mm.
but he meant it, I think, at quite a profound level. And we're all good. We are all good at something, and we've all got a unique contribution to make. God, the world needs it, um,
Mm.
and nations are the same. Look what's going on in the world. So we can't change the world ourselves. We can change our little bit of it, get it wrong, get
Yeah.
up again, and be the best we can be. Look, I'm a coach and I'm a psychotherapist. Are there other psychotherapists and coach? Yes. Are they better than me? A lot of them probably are. They don't do it the way I do it, and I don't do it the way they do it. And I'll hit the spot with some clients, not with others, and they will do the same. So there's no league table about whether you're the best this or the best that. It's just got to be the best you can be. And
Mm.
and there's no, we're not going to get measured against somebody else. It's not the Premier League where somebody wins it and somebody gets relegated. Um, and interestingly, the best coaches, sports coaches, are the ones that obsess about being the best you can be, not about winning, which sounds a bit
Yes.
counterintuitive. But the great ones are the ones that get the best out of people,
Mm.
and the trophies come along anyway as a byproduct.
Well,
You
I'm
know,
experiencing that. I have a personal trainer. He gives me a good workout twice a week,
right?
and he is pushing me to my limit, not pushing me to his limit.
Yeah,
I will get well dones and fantastics when I'm being the best I can be,
yeah,
and that's the power of a really good trainer and coach is
absolutely.
to take me to my edge, not
Yeah,
beyond my edge, and
yeah,
I really respect that. So I'm
yeah,
always bit giving what I can give to the max.
yeah. And the chances are, if you're in a sports field, for example, you will win things anyway. You know,
Mm.
but for every gold medalist, there are a lot of good people that are excellent at what they do. And I mean, it must be wonderful to win an Olympic medal. But if you
Mm.
come second, does it mean you're rubbish? Well, I suppose it would in some parts of the world or in some people's eyes.
Mm.
But actually, if you come from, I always remember being very inspired, and really show my age now. But I remember, I probably read about, just to wiggle out of that one. But in the '60 Olympics, there was an American sprinter called Wilma Rudolph, And if you Google her, she was amazing. I think she was in a wheelchair until she was 9 or 10 or something, and won a gold medal in a sprint. I mean, that's what you call doing something amazing. The fact that she could even run the race and get in the team was an achievement, and then she goes on and wins it. I mean, that's just phenomenal to be able to do that. I mean, that's inspiring.
But when
You know?
you're in that situation, you don't set out to be inspiring or brave or a role model. You're just doing what you do, aren't you? And
Yeah, and she probably, I don't know her well enough. Well, I don't know her at all. But my guess is she was just determined to be the best she could be. And she didn't want to be defined by the fact that I think she'd had polio or something. And she didn't want to be defined by it. Now, sometimes it would be physically impossible because you can't change it. And we do at least have Paralympics now. But in her case, she actually managed to overcome it totally. But that doesn't mean somebody who can't is deficient, because there must be a point where you're way beyond mindset. You just can't do it. If your body is restricted because of a disability, you can't change that with a different attitude. Gets back to the fear thing. Is fear real or not? Well, it is real. Doesn't mean you have to be defeated by it. But to tell somebody you're imagining being fearful just would disempower them, because they think, oh my God, what the hell's wrong with me? Whereas somebody like her, I'm talking about her now, 100 years later, because it's just such an amazing story. So,
see,
yeah.
you, without giving any secrets away, you gender transitioned at some point a while ago, didn't you? And you
Yeah,
were
just
married at the time.
after the Boer War. It
Yeah.
was, well, it was in the
I was trying to
1980s.
I was trying not to out you as a trans person, but I'm outing you as an older person
Well,
now.
I think I did earlier. I've outed myself as an older person anyway, because although my father was in his 40s when he had me, if you do the maths, you can tell I'm not 35 anymore. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was in the 1980s. And yeah, it was a different world then, but it's what it was.
I mean, now, I transitioned 6 years ago, so I transitioned in the 2010 to 2020 decade.
Yeah,
And I've grown up in a world where I transitioned, where I was on the up curve of trans inclusion, trans acceptance.
yeah,
The society was becoming positive, which gave me the courage and confidence to say it will be okay, which is completely different to where we are today. But when you were exploring your identity,
yeah,
it was still in the trans people are weird, trans people are kind of
yeah,
outliers. There was
yeah,
little
yeah.
knowledge, but you were almost ignored to a point.
Well, it was interesting. I was I'm speaking at a conference and shared this. I had my own business at the time, and one of my clients said to me, "Look, we really like you and we've done some great work, but we can't have our brand associated with somebody like you. It'd be bad for us." I mean, now they'd be saying, "Where's the diversity box? Let me tick it."
Hmm.
And then he said, "So we think it's time for a change." I thought, "Oh, the irony." So, yeah, but I think I'm a great believer that everything's different at different times. I don't think it's better or worse. I think in some ways now, and one of the reasons I'm passionate about supporting young people, it's kind of hard for them now because the world's telling them that they're deluded or they're not right. When I did it, you were weird and so you could fight back or not. So in some ways it's a lot better, but in other ways I think there's still a lot of work to do. Um, people's very
There's a lot more.
existence gets challenged, and the media can be very hostile and it's very toxic.
Yeah.
Um, so, so it may have been harder in some respects in my era, but then I think today's got its own different challenges. I don't think it's easier or harder than it was. It's different.
Yeah, the stories in the papers in your era and uh, somebody who may know Jackie Gavin, when she transitioned, there was lots of shock horror, front page of
Yeah.
the Sun, expose type stuff.
Mm.
And it was like storm in a teacup, move on. Okay, maybe not in your life, in their life.
Yeah.
But now it's like this barrage, sustained attacks, day in, day out.
Yeah.
Almost like trying to erase trans people from
Yeah, I
society
think
completely.
it's the what do they call it? Is it gaslighting? It's this thing about you don't really exist, you're crazy, go and get yourself fixed.
Yeah.
That's the trope, isn't it, at the moment? And I work with young people all the time who are in a bad place because of that. Because they're made to, well, they're not made to, but they feel inferior. So my job is to help them to understand. Actually, look, you can choose how you respond to this. You don't have to be defined by that. It's not easy, but we can empower people, and you don't have to put up with, what people are telling you. What's important to you? My life is about the work that I do. You know, I don't know about legacies, but I've got two amazing grandchildren. I mean, that's the coolest thing ever. Got a grandson and a granddaughter. I mean, how blessed am I? They're amazing, and my two daughters are fantastic human beings. So I can focus on that, or I can pick up the Daily Fail or whatever the paper of the day is that has some derogatory headline, and I can read that and take it in. Well, I can choose not to. So, but it's not easy for everybody else, and that's why we have to sort of help empower people and show them that there's a choice and that they can be different, and help people explore it as well. So they're not absolutely sure that they're doing the right thing. Got so many years that having a sexuality that wasn't heterosexual was illegal, for God's sake. Not just frowned upon, but actually breaking the law. I mean, we're only going back 40 or 50 years for that. I mean, when we think of it
And then
now, we
Section
kind of,
28.
oh, well,
We're talking about,
we look at it now and you think, God, I can't believe that even happened. But at the time, it was common. And so, the world is in a different place, but we've still got a lot of work to do. And
I woke up this morning listening to reports from the United States around the Supreme Court, this document leak about repealing the abortion laws that was set up in 1973, I think it was.
Yeah.
Which means that each state can now have its own legislature to decide whether abortion is legal in their state. And they think that's,
will mean, of
well, to
course, that
me
women
personally, it's a backward step.
just have to cross the just go to the next state, won't they? I mean, it's mad,
I saw that Amazon were now expanded their healthcare provision to include supporting women who wanted to travel out of state for treatment.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I think that's a good example, because for me, everybody's entitled to their opinion or their belief about whether a termination is justified or not. What you don't have the right to do is to dictate that to women. They for my money, they have it's their choice. You may or may not agree with it, but I don't think it's for society to tell them what they have to do. You can believe it's right or wrong, but that's your belief, and that you can do that about anything. You may not like it. If you're homophobic, get on with it. Don't impose it on gay people. If you're transphobic, don't pillory trans people. Take your prejudice, keep it, deal with it. I can't change someone's mind, but I'm not going to allow them to dictate who I am and how I feel. That's my choice.
Yeah. So when you were, growing up in the 80s, when you were maturing in the 80s, for want of a better way of putting it.
Sadly, I grew up a bit before that.
Yeah, I grew up a bit before that. I think I left school in 81, so yeah, it was a bit before that. There was a ruling, wasn't there, where I think it was a lord or an earl married a trans woman, and under traditional laws, and they were married.
Yeah.
And then was it the divorce settlement or something that
Yeah,
they were
what
arguing?
happened. Well, actually, you've just highlighted a really important case in the history of trans people. You're referring to April Ashley, and who, I don't know if you know this, but she sadly died not that long ago, just a few weeks ago. And I met her. I interviewed her for a magazine. And April, back in the 1960s, married Lord Arthur Corbett. And April was actually born the son of a Liverpool docker. And so there was a class thing as well. And the marriage faltered. And she told me this story. And that was well documented in the press. And in the 1960s, unbelievably, when you got divorced, it wasn't automatic, and a party could defend it. So you had to prove something like infidelity or violence or separate, whatever. And so when he sought a divorce, she fought it. So it went to the courts, and Mr. Justice Ormerod ruled on it. And he, because what happened was his lawyers went for the fact, well, look, this woman was born a male, so legally there's still a man, and two men can't marry because, of course, we're way before same-sex marriage. So it's never a legal marriage, so we'll go for an annulment. And Mr. Justice Ormerod ruled in his favour. I mean, there was a lot more to it than this. And he uttered the immortal words, nobody can change their chromosomal sex. So the die was cast because we have a law of precedent whereby trans people could never change their birth certificates. And of course, that stayed the same up until the Gender Recognition Act in 2004, when it became law a year later, where people could apply. And April, bless her, got her recognition all those years later. And so that's what you call a trailblazer, being dragged through the courts. And you can imagine the headlines. You can write your own derogatory headline. And but the interesting thing is, Mr. Justice Ormerod did later say he regretted the comments he'd made because he realised the impact that it would have. So
trans people weren't that common, were they? They were very living under the covers. There was not a lot
exactly.
of
I mean, they
visibility,
weren't very public. And April had the benefit that she was a very glamorous looking woman. I mean, she was a dancer in France at the Carousel Club, worked with people like Cochanel, these early trailblazers, all trans women in those days who were changed. And the first one I was aware of was Christine Jorgensen, who was, again, a very glamorous person and was one of Harry Benjamin's first patients, Harry Benjamin being the clinician in America, as you probably know, who started, first person to sort of recognize really that this was a medical thing that needed to be helped. These were not just crazy people who had it in their heads that they'd rather look different. And they got to understand that they were very convinced and determined to make those changes. So she was fascinating, actually, when I met her, because she was a bit of a duchess, and I mean that in a nice way. She had the sort of blue rinse. I mean, she was in her 80s when I met her, I think, and I was granted an interview. I did an interview for a magazine, and I went in, and she said, would you like something to drink? And it was a heat wave. And I just got off the underground. She was staying in a flat in King's Cross because she was living abroad, and she had a friend who'd let her have the flat while she was here. I think she was launching her book or something. And I said, oh, I'd love a glass of water. And she said, well, I suppose I can do that, but I do have some champagne. So anyway, we abolished, a couple of bottles of champagne, and she really opened up, and she really was a trailblazer. I mean, every move she made was scrutinised in the press, and they weren't kind, So she really had to sort of, put a chin in the air and say, "Screw you, I'm going to be me." Easy to say,
Dare
very
to be
hard
me.
to do. Yeah. So she made it easy for people like me. I couldn't have done it without people like her and people like Jan Morris, who wrote Conundrum, who again died not that long ago. I think a year or two back. It was a very well-known, and she overcame it because she was always defined as a travel writer, first and foremost. which is what she was. So
Mm.
she managed to say, look, I'm living my life the way I want to live it. And these were extraordinary people. We take it for granted a bit now, but when we look back, and in the climate that there was in the country as well, they were extraordinarily brave. They had a
I mean,
lot.
I grew up. It was my early memories are in the early 70s. Born in 65, so I saw these kind of stories in the periphery of my vision.
Yeah,
That we were a very middle class, straight laced family. We didn't really. My parents were teachers. There was no party or queerness about our street, our family, or anything like that. So. But I was well aware of some of these stories, the sensationalized. I caught glimpses of on Open University when I happened to be off home ill or something. Or I was always very fascinated by, um, I suppose in those days, transsexual sensational stories, and
yeah,
that all it just became something inside me. Just knew that they were talking about me as well. It just
yeah,
really whilst they didn't necessarily they didn't inspire me to change, but they allowed me to start exploring who I was and see myself through a
yeah.
slightly different lens.
Yeah, I remember reading about Christine Jorgensen and getting that shiver down the back and thinking,
Mm.
oh my God, somebody like me. Didn't know there was anyone else. That kind of feeling. So yeah, so it's kind of like a two-sided coin. The part of you goes, oh, what a relief, and then the other part goes, oh God, what do I do now?
Mm.
Because it just felt
Yeah,
impossible. I
it took
even
30 odd
in those
years
days
for
I would
me
never
to.
have dreamt
Yeah,
that I would ever do it. Just thought I would keep it undercover for my whole life. I didn't think I would ever
uh,
do it, but I did.
likewise. Yeah, there was no pathway, was there? You had to be out there and bulletproof almost if you wanted to do it. There's no sort of like
Well, I'm
everyday path.
being treated appallingly by clinicians and so on. That made it
Mm.
very clear they didn't believe in it, but were doing you a favour. And were rude. Um, didn't answer
Insulting. Yeah,
correspondence.
yeah.
It's awful.
What was that BBC TV documentary over was it 6 episodes, wasn't there, in the 70s or 80s about a trans woman who they documented her surgery and she died a
Yeah,
couple of years back, didn't she? She used to run a
Julia.
nightclub
It
and
was Julia Grant.
Julia Grant.
And
Yes.
yeah, and I saw it originally, and I saw the follow up. I mean, why anyone would do that, I don't know, but she did. But she had an extraordinarily hard time first time round,
Mm,
and I think she never really um, got to be particularly happy, from what I could make of it, for whatever reason I don't know.
mm,
But that was hard, and a doctor telling you exactly what you had to do and what you couldn't do. I won't do this if you don't X, and you know,
yeah.
almost having to plead to get anything done.
And,
Um,
and this threshold of belief, and you don't convince me you can live as a woman until you convince me you live as a woman, and I'm not prepared to help you if I don't believe you can succeed in life. It's like
I
it's
don't.
a
I mean, I
real
think there's a merit
backwards
to
thing.
people living in role, before they do things that are
Mm,
irreversible. I'm not saying that it should be a particular length of time or this, that, and the other, but I think it's help. You have to know that you're going to cope, I suppose, but
mm,
there needs to have these specified times. And I remember I was involved with helping rewrite standards of care a while back, and it used to be that you had to live in role for 2 years, but that was before you even got referred for surgeries. So we said, well, look, the reality is you're talking about people waiting 3 and 4 years. If you make it at least 12 months before a referral, it's still going to be 2 years before anything happens. So that got shifted. And then, of course, we've got concerns about young people. And so it goes on. The whole thing's evolving as we speak.
mm.
Um, so, yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, in some ways it's easier now, but I'm not sure that really there's no league table. And I think it's just different.
Mm.
Um,
So there were you. married, children,
Yeah.
realizing that you wanted to explore your innermost gender identity. And then you found that because of this precedent set by Ashley, that you couldn't get married. You had to have your marriage annulled if you
Yeah.
wanted to transition. And you at that time of your life, you got your placard out, you put your T-shirt on and said, I'm going to do something about this.
Well, yeah, because I was denied the same rights as other women, for things like pensions and benefits is what it was about, really. So I fought it in the courts, and eventually we won the case. And the crazy thing about it is, it was a very short window because, once we the whole sort of take a step back, the whole premise was they didn't want to open the door to same-sex marriage. So I could have been granted what I was applying for, but only if the marriage was annulled, because it would have opened the door to same-sex marriage. Well, that happened anyway. So it was a very short window, and it did open the floodgates for a few other people that were caught up in it in that same time frame for me, as me. But all I was ever arguing for was I wanted the same rights as everybody else. I wasn't asking for preferential treatment. And luckily, I talked about having a few issues with my dad, but the one thing I did benefit from was I got his bloody mindedness. And I thought, screw this. I'm not going to get divorced. Well, actually, it was even worse at the time. He had to annul it. And I got 2 children. I thought, why am I going to do that? So I could just have gone quietly, and I thought, no, screw this. And I got a pro bono lawyer, and we fought it. It took 10 years, but we got there in the end. And the joke is, for what it costs the government to fight it, could have paid me and a few others that it affected about 20 times over. So there was a financial cost to the country by them not just doing it.
And you told me the story before, so you're kind of underplaying it. You went all the way to the European Court of Justice.
Yeah, what happened was we got. The wonderful part. I'll tell you the best thing about this. It was very humbling. I got a wonderful pro bono lawyer named Kerry. I'll give her name. By the time this finished, it was a QC. She was a junior barrister when it started. And then a couple of months or about a year into it, it was all getting heavier. And people in the community knew about it because I wasn't the first to challenge it. Other people had. And 2 solicitors came on board, Chris and Jackie. And they'd heard about it, said, look, we'd like to be involved because you can't, barrister on their own is not going to do it. So then when we got to the Court of Appeal and it was referred to the Supreme Court, we got this amazing QC, one of the top barristers in the land came on board. So I had 4 top lawyers working pro bono, not earning a penny. And the Supreme Court decided, I think, because it was going to create a precedent, because you get 5 judges, or I think it's sometimes 7. It's always an odd number for obvious reasons, so you can get a decision. But they referred it, I think they must have been split, and I'll never know whether the 3 was for or against, but they referred it to the European Court of Justice. And 17 lordships heard the case, and a year later it came back, and it was their opinion that was sought. So the Supreme Court actually made the ruling, and they found for us, so we'd won. So that all took, I don't know, over 10 years. I always remember, you remember Charles Dickens' book, Bleak House? It's about chancery. And it was like that. It took forever. But these lawyers, I can't speak too highly of them. And do you know what? I tried to buy them lunch in Luxembourg. They wouldn't even let me buy them lunch. They insisted on buying mine. I mean, how amazing is that? So, my lesson in life is when you do put your nose up above the parapet, good people often come on board. But you've got to somehow find a way of stepping up before they do, because otherwise they don't know about you. And I will be forever honoured by the fact that these lawyers represent, they didn't just do it for me. They felt it was an injustice and it affected other people. So it was amazing. really. Still can't believe it. I still pinch myself now that I got that
So
much
the
out.
impact of this ruling was the creation of the Gender Recognition Act 2004 to allow people with...
What it was is we were competing with that, because the Gender Recognition Act decreed that in order to get a gender recognition certificate, by then it was not annulment, they changed it to divorce. Otherwise you couldn't get it. Then, of course, in 2010, when we had same-sex marriage, it became irrelevant. Then that didn't matter anymore. So there were a few of us caught in that window for about 3 or 4 years where we were affected by it. So it was only a handful of us, for goodness sake, But they were determined not to create a precedent, the government. So they fought it tooth and nail. And I mean, I had to sit in courts over that 10-year period, having every single derogatory term you can imagine used to describe me, and having to sit there quietly and be called a post-operative this and a post-operative that, and, loads of inaccurate terms. But in the end, we got there. So it was worth it. But would I have done it had I known it was going to take so long? Yeah, I probably would have done. Just to make Dad proud.
Yeah.
But you can only do it. You can't do this sort of thing on your own. And that was,
No.
and I repeat what I said earlier, that was the biggest lesson for me. And I say this to people all the time in different walks of life. When you get up and you're trying to do something, good people see you and come on board if you let them. Can't do it on our own. None of us can do it on our own.
No.
Whether we're speaking on the day after the World Championship snooker final, and Ronnie O'Sullivan won it for the 7th time. He's got a coach. He's got his mindset coach. He didn't do it on his own. Yes, he's very talented and he works hard and spends hours at the practice table, I'm sure. But he doesn't do it on his own. He's got people who help him. But
So what's the future
about you
then?
if you don't stand up.
What's the future for trans people? We've already said we're living in a time where there's a rise of gender criticality, if that's a phrase, where we're being kind of pitted against. Think of the women, think of the girls, think of same-sex rights or sort of gender-based rights and erasure of what it means to be a woman. And that's being thrown at our feet, saying trans people are ruining what it means to be a woman.
Well, and it's an interesting debate. And let me tell you, as somebody with 2 daughters and a granddaughter, I'm passionate about women's rights. It can't not be. But it gets conflated, and they're two different discussions, or they should be. This notion that every trans woman is a potential sex beast, and same-sex toilets women will be attacked. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. But what is true is that women in society are subjected to violence, sexual violence. All of that is important and extremely relevant. And I would stand up and speak for any woman on that. But don't confuse it with the issue that all trans women are suddenly going to be mad assaulters. It's not true. And there have been instances, they always quote, somebody got murdered, was in a prison or something. Right? One person. And yes, that sort of thing needs to be changed if that happened. But let's not take away from the argument that we need women to have equality. And it's the women in sport thing as well, with trans people in sport. And of course we need an even playing field. Let's figure out how to do that rather than just screaming abuse at each other. What do you say?
We all want fairness. We want
What do you say
fairness in
about
society.
Caster
We want fairness in
Semenya?
sport.
You remember Caster Semenya, the South African athlete, who got banned in the end because it was unfair? Well, she's still a woman. Whatever people thought about her, I don't know the woman. Maybe there's an intersex thing going on with high testosterone levels. Well, how do we resolve that? That's the debate. How do we resolve that so that women can compete on an even playing field, if you excuse the pun. That's an important discussion. Let's have that discussion and not confuse it with, trans women trying to replace women and water their rights down. I don't want that. I don't want my daughters and my granddaughter to live lives where they feel threatened by violence, physical and sexual. And if my granddaughter, who's actually a really good gymnast, if she goes for that, I want her to have an equal playing field as well. That's the discussion.
I completely agree. I want everybody to have a fair opportunity to compete in their chosen sport or whatever it is in life, and without it being at the detriment of somebody else.
Yeah, and so if there is a trans woman who's full of testosterone and wins an event by, 100 meters by 30 yards or something ridiculous because they've got that, then we need to look at that. But it doesn't mean that you sort of make this blanket ban and say, well, that can't go. How do we measure it?
And I think the impact is more likely to be on cis women, not women who aren't trans, who are suddenly too tall, too big. And there's some photographs of this. Some of these boxers and some of these weightlifters are competing, and they actually picked the wrong person and said that's the trans person. Well, actually, no, they weren't the trans person.
Yeah,
they were cis. And so what happens is you end up picking on people you think you're trying to protect.
But also, somebody said, well, they're going to reach a point where you're going to need a document to prove that you're a woman to go to a toilet. But if you think about it, that means that all women have got to carry one. How do you distinguish?
Yeah.
You can't, because if you've got a doubt about somebody, they've got to have a piece of paper, haven't they? And it might be somebody who has always had a female anatomy, was, with a birth certificate that says female. You're going to expect them to carry a document. Nobody thinks it through. We come up with all these solutions that are totally unworkable. But the real issue is, how do we have equality in society for women? That's the issue.
I agree.
That people get confused with, well, this person shouldn't be able to go in that toilet. Who the hell cares? Really,
yes. And it's a very American British problem. You look over the world, most toilets are holes in the floor or single cubicles in cafes. You go to Spain on holiday, there are no gendered toilets. They're just toilets.
I'm not saying none of these things are issues, but the issue is about, well, how do we do that, as opposed to this thing about, well, you can't allow trans women to go in this space or that space. Because the solutions that people come up with are totally unworkable anyway.
So and they end up disadvantaging women at large, generally. Yeah, completely.
But I repeat what I said. I'm in a family. I have a female partner. I've got 2 daughters and a granddaughter. I mean, for God's sake, I don't want them living in a world where they feel unsafe.
No, and I completely agree. And on that note, we've been chatting away now for, an hour plus. So thank you so much. Lots of things there, and it's been an honour catching up with you and just talking about your ECJ journey all those years ago and some of the groundbreaking work you did to benefit many, many people. Largely, maybe at the time you were in the public eye, but now you've kind of just taking your t-shirt off and just getting on with life being you again. And I really, really admire and respect that. So how do people get in contact with you if they want to take advantage of your coaching or psychotherapy services?
Yeah, well, Shelley Bridgman. I'm on LinkedIn. It's my main sort of social media platform. And my website is shelleybridgman.com. And my psychotherapy site is actually michellebridgman.com. But mostly I do coaching these days.
And Bridgman is BRIDGMAN.
No, I had illiterate ancestors. They left the E out somewhere along the line. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. If you're listening in, you'd like to get in touch, drop Shelley a LinkedIn message, check out her websites, and maybe do some research on some of the work she did all those years ago, the 10 years that she battled the legal system with those barristers and solicitors that are there to help her. So no, thank you so much. And a huge thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in, for listening, getting this far. Please do subscribe if you've not already for future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. Please share this. I've also a number of other exciting guests lined up over the next few weeks and months that I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by. So if you'd like to be a guest, then please let me know. I also welcome any suggestions or feedback on how we can improve the show to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. Finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.